millions of Black professionals by assessing jobs, mentorship, events, and content. So users can join by location, by industry-based groups to gain knowledge and network and upskill their content. So you can sign up to Javelin by visiting javelin.byp.network/dashboard, which will be placed in the chat at the end, and we'll have a QR code, that you can also scan. But for the rest of the webinar, we will move into in conversation with Rico, and we also have our producer Sarah with us. So she'll be watching the Q&A box, and we'll have 10-15 minutes Q&A at the end. So please, if you have any questions throughout, pop them in the chat box, and we'll be able to read those at the end. So please let us know as well who you are, what you're working on, and how we can get connected to you. If you have any ideas or ways you are developing your creative space, be that in the Black LGBTQ plus community or other creative spaces, it'd be great to hear from you as well, and we can share some of that with Rico. So on to introducing our amazing guest today. Rico has experience in the film and high-end TV industry as a producer, director, film programmer, and writer. So in 2017, Rico launched CrewHQ, a queer film festival in Birmingham that prioritizes the queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and POC experiences. So having previously worked at BFI as their race equality lead as well, Rico is now the training and skills director for CrewHQ at Warner Brothers Discovery. So after that long introduction, I finally get to show Rico's lovely face, and thank you for joining us today and rushing over to be with us at 7 p.m. Bless you.
It's definitely a journey. I'm based at the studio in Watford Junction, so that's where I go every day to work. It's a very special place. Yeah.
Oh, lovely. Oh, brilliant. Okay. Well, yeah, thank you for the rush over to the studio, from the studio. But I guess just to start off with a little bit more about you and how you began your film journey and your start in the creative industry.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really talk about my start in the creative industry without talking about my why, right? So, like, why did I feel that film and high-end TV was the path I wanted to take? So, I guess it all started when I was younger. So, I was from like a poor background. I don't use like working class and low income because we were poor. We were single earners. Like, my mom was on benefits. And for me, my escapism was books. There would be one day a month where I'd go to the library and then take out the maximum amount of books. Sometimes I'd steal them because my maximum wasn't enough, but I'd always return them. And so I really started to imagine worlds and escape from my reality through books, and understood the power of words, the power of imagination. And I knew from a really young age that I wanted to be part of telling stories. I wanted to be a storyteller in some way, shape, or form, or I wanted to facilitate the making of stories. Um, so I often say that I love books. My first love was books. But it was when I was 13 years old, I went to the cinema for the first time because my aunt took us. And I remember seeing the film was terrible. It was Recess School's Out. So for any of you that remember the cartoon Recess, it was like the film version of that. But I do remember one thing, and that is that I was drawn to how powerful it was to see what a director, a writer, a person wanted me to see reflected on screen. Up until then, books had been my first love. And what is great and also limiting about books is you fill the story in your mind with things that you've encountered with your own imagination. And the imagination is not a neutral space. So that means you're pulling from things you've experienced, from places you've been. So film is a way for you to see a completely new perspective that you hadn't encountered before in exactly the way someone wants you to see it. And so I think even then, like, a seed was planted in my mind about the power of film to change hearts and minds, the power of film to shape perspectives. I could be from a poor background and learn all about what it's like to live in Alaska or what it's like for the queer community in Canada because I was absorbing those stories through film. And so my journey, I guess, in film began with university, where I gave myself a choice. Could either get into what I perceived as the best arts university at that time, which was University of the Arts London. Don't think that now. And then, or I could go into forensic science because I was always like really interested by forensic science. And so I applied for both on UCAS and I got into University of the Arts. So I went into kind of the creative industry. But still at that point, I chose between media practice and production for live events and TV. And I was very much like production, live events, and TV was more employable to me. So that's the one I chose. I deeply regret that decision. I should have done media practice because that was film. But at that time in my life, what I was looking for was stability. I was looking for employability. So I graduated after a really hard 3 years in London, and then came back to Birmingham because London was completely unaffordable. And what I recognized in in Birmingham, was that there was no film production at all. It didn't exist. And where it did exist, it was like full of people that had been in the industry for longer than me, that have tried to get in for longer than me. And so I started to think about what my career looked like. And also, like, transparently, in my second year of university, I had a psychotic break. So I was living with psychosis at the time, which meant that I was experiencing auditory and visual hallucinations mildly, but still enough to impair my day to day. So what I did was I volunteered for a year at 17 different arts organizations because I wanted to know if I was going to be able to work a 9 to 5 job, if I was going to be able to work those hours. And if I was volunteering, then there was less pressure on me to be on time. There was less pressure for me to turn up. I could do the best I could and allow myself to be forgiving with myself if I wasn't able to do it. But after a year, I did it. So I got put on a program, amazing program from the Independent Cinema Office, called FEDS, unfortunately called FEDS, which stands for Film Exhibition, Distribution and Sales. And during that 8 months period, I was placed at Flatpack Film Festival in Birmingham, and I was held by an incredible woman called Amy Smart, who wasn't afraid to kind of have conversations with me about what I was thinking, what I was feeling, but also gave me access to what it truly was to build a festival from scratch. And I remember the conversation that we had was about, sorry, this is really long-winded, but there's lots.
I hear it all of it.
I remember the conversation that we had was um piracy versus streaming versus the cinema. And so my relationship to film piracy is complicated because I acknowledge that film piracy detrimentally affects the industry, but I also recognize that because I'm from a poor background, I wouldn't be in the industry if it wasn't for piracy. My only access to film was through film piracy. And I remember like the DVD man down the road who used to do like free pirate DVDs for a fiver. That was my like first, well, outside of, yeah, it was my first kind of cinematic experience, even though it was terrible because it was, a pirate, it was a cam copy. Um, and so we started talking about this, and I kind of defended piracy and streaming by just saying, for the queer community, cinemas don't show our films. So how are we supposed to watch films on the big screen, which I acknowledge is the best way to watch a film, if cinemas aren't showing it? And she said something that I think altered the course of my life. So I owe a lot to Amy. She said, if it doesn't exist, why don't you just build it? If you feel that strongly about it, why don't you just build it? And at that time, I was in the perfect position because I was supported by Flatpack to be able to do that, supported by them to bring queer film shorts and features to Birmingham. So that's really when CineQ kind of started. It started off as like a community cinema that ran every 2 months. And I wanted to prioritize the perspectives of queer, trans, and intersex people of color. And just because like no one was showing films from that perspective after the success of Moonlight, more films were being made and more films were being resourced. Still not the same level as their white counterpart or kind of like straight films that we see in cinema, but more were being made. And so CineQ became a space for us to show shorts and features, always saying that at least 50% of our program was going to be Black and global majority. And after a few years of doing that, alongside working full-time jobs, I managed to make it into a festival, which was really successful at the time. But I also really struggled with one, the reality is that when you work in the arts, you have to have a full-time job and then do your creative output outside of it. It wasn't sustainable, and I was finding myself to be burnt out. But also in Birmingham, there's definitely a glass ceiling that I hit. Both because of my historical marginalization, because I'm queer, disabled, and black, but also because there's no money in Birmingham. Like, you're being paid a director level job, you're being paid 30K a year. And if you want like a family and kids or a future, or to own your own like house, it's not enough, because we recognize that, we are in the times that we live in. And so when I got the opportunity to kind of interview for a job as race equality lead, after kind of working on third sector projects, so I worked as the campaign manager for Aging with Pride at the Birmingham LGBT Centre, which was a campaign that shed light on the issues that faced older LGBT people, such as trans people going into care homes with neurodegenerative diseases, and then having toxic family members convince them that they want to detransition, so they didn't want to be trans anymore, or kind of people facing homophobia, and actually violent homophobia in care homes. So we launched a campaign around that. I also worked at Shout Festival as their festival director for a period of time. Also would not recommend. So I did a lot of third sector work, a lot of arts work, and at the same time I was running CrewHQ. When I got the job at the British Film Institute as their race equality lead, that was the first time that I was able to kind of say to myself, look, you need to calm down everything else. One, you live in London. If you take this job, you have to live in London, because otherwise it's not going to be a benefit to you. You're not going to get the real experience of being able to make those networks. You're not going to progress in the same way that you would do if you lived in London, if you lived in Birmingham. And I love Birmingham, and I miss Birmingham terribly, because all my friends are there, all of my networks are there, my circle is there. But ultimately, I had to make the choice to leave all that behind for my career, and that is the realities that we face as professionals, especially professionals working in the arts. If there's anyone here that works in the arts, you'll understand. Like, you have to move, you have to take the opportunities, you have to go where the opportunities take you. You have to constantly make new friends, constantly be in new crowds. Most of your friendships become professional just because that's all you have in those periods of time. So yeah, started working at the BFI as a race equality lead. And essentially, my mission was to make the organization anti-racist, which quickly became apparent was very complex. The BFI is an arm's length government body, which basically means their government. We're currently under a very conservative government, which is constantly making cuts to arts, constantly making decisions that are inequitable to historically marginalized people. So there's an understanding that in an arm's length government body, it would be very similar. A lot of my work then turned external. It was about talking to people that were willing to listen about what anti-racism looked like, talking about the 4Ps, which I kind of define as people, policy, practice, and partnership. And that's kind of like the way that you dismantle racism equitably. And so people being how we treat each other, the language that we use. So that would be kind of doing a workshop around language, or having kind of dedicated language that everyone internally uses, or doing culture work around like developing a coaching culture rather than a hierarchical culture. Then there's policy, which is literally anti-racism policies, anti-ableism policies, bullying harassment policies, and also grievance procedures that actually were equitable. Because in most grievance procedures, if you've got a racist manager, you file a grievance procedure and that is sent up to your manager. So like, and also we have to acknowledge that most HR systems defend the organization, and they're not there to defend the individual. And so I found that, yeah, that was an interesting piece. And also things like EAP services, which we have in the UK, where if you experience a trauma, you get 6 sessions of like counseling or kind of therapy for free. But if you're a member, if I was sexually assaulted by trigger warning, if I was sexually assaulted by a member of the opposite sex, then I would be able to go to that EAP service and say, I want to speak to someone that's the same sex as me because my trauma is related to someone in the opposite sex. So I wouldn't feel comfortable having 6 sessions of therapy with someone of the opposite sex. There is no system to do that with racism. There is no system to do that with ableism. I can't go and say, I want to speak to a black therapist because actually I experienced racism from a white person. So that all fits into policy. Then you've got practice, which is the stuff you actually do. So that might be like 30% of your budget, of your organization's budget, specifically for historically marginalized people. If you've got a program that's like, we're going to take 5 Black people, Black and global majority people to Cannes or Berlinale because we understand that they don't have those opportunities. So we're going to invest in those opportunities. That all fits into practice. And then the last one, which is arguably the most important one, partnerships, because if an organization like the BFI was like, we've got £3 million for historically marginalized people, the BFI has more reputability and more resource than a lot of the grassroots movements, even though they're doing the work better. So a more equitable way of doing things is to partner with those movements, give the funding to those movements, and then work in collaboration. Those movements would benefit from the reputability of an organization like BFI and the resource of an organization like the BFI. The BFI would benefit from the integrity and the deep work of those grassroots movements. So it's better. So a lot of the work I was doing was external because I wasn't able to impact the work internally like I wanted to. And that wasn't some of the people that were great, but it was very like I have utmost respect for the CEO. I have utmost respect for the inclusion team, and there are some really incredible people inside the BFI. But there was something systemically problematic about the BFI, and that wasn't going to change under the current dynamic. So I decided that it was time to go. After 2.5 years, I decided it was time to go. And then I just did freelance work. I just kind of bounced about, kind of doing anti-racism for different organizations, which I hate freelance because, again, I come from an unstable background. I was self-sufficient at the age of 16 because I stopped speaking to my parents and my family at the age of 16. So for me, that sustainability, that kind of that structure, that safety that comes with being in full-time employment was really necessary. So being freelance where, you know, you really don't know when your next paycheck's going to come, even if you're doing consistent work, you don't know that people are going to pay those invoices on time. So that was hard. And while I was going through that process, obviously I was interviewing for various different places, which landed me here, I guess, as a director of skills and training for CrewHQ, which is, for those of you that don't know, it's a skills and training center based at the studio at Warner Brothers Studio in Leavesden. And so what I do at the moment fits into 3 different categories. There's the new entrance bit of what we do. So that's stuff like our trainee program, which is currently live. And that takes people that have never worked in the industry before that want to work in production below the line. So not writer, not producer, not director, and not actor. Anyone else that wants to work in any of the roles that I haven't just listed, you can apply. It's a really simple process. We'll take you through the assessment process, interview, and if you get through, you'll be trained for 2 weeks at the studio, and then you'll have the opportunity to be placed at some of our productions. So ones that we had last year were things like House of the Dragon, or kind of, so they're big productions. And so, yeah, we give opportunities to people that are emerging in the industry and even emerging to studio. We say if anyone's had less than a year of studio experience or less than a year of production experience, they'll still be eligible for the program. So that's like new entrants. And then we do upskilling. So specific, like that example of that is for Warner Brothers Discovery specifically is we do week-long trainings to address the gaps in skills on production. And then there's the top level stuff, which is like culture change, anti-racism, anti-ableism for HODs, because there's no point in bringing a fresh new pipeline of people into the industry if the attitudes of the industry are still archaic and problematic, especially because rightfully so, the culture of younger generations and my generation are more geared towards well-being than they are to do with productivity. Because after years of austerity, we've realized that working harder doesn't actually achieve anything for us. It achieves something under capitalism. It achieves something from the big boss. So we're now more interested in our sustainability and our well-being than we are about being productive for an organization that will never see the benefit of. And so with those new attitudes, those better attitudes in production, there's obviously going to be a kind of a generational clash within production. So we try and facilitate culture change for HODs to make sure that that goes a little bit smoothly. So that's what we're working on at the moment. But we are brand new. We launched last year in November. So it really is a new initiative with lots of scope and lots of potential. So yeah, that's my career.
Amazing. Incredible journey, honestly. I felt like I was with you. I felt it was a good book. I was like, wow, I'm here for the story. I'm here for the journey. That was incredible. Just everything that you've done, starting from books, the fact that it wasn't even necessarily about films, it was just about stories and being seen and being heard and finding representation wherever you could. And I think that was something that is, you've touched on so many things, which is amazing, that I did want to talk to you about in terms of accessibility and representation. And throughout everything you said, I think it would be great to just kind of break down what you're doing and what you have done. And so I guess you already touched on it a little bit in terms of you worked at Flatpak and you've worked at BFI, you've had your feet in both larger organizations and ones more independent. And you did speak about the barriers that are there, but I guess maybe just to expand a little bit more in terms of if people are starting out, is it best, you know, you did move and you developed from like Birmingham out of London, but would you say it is best, I guess, or where would you say it's best to start if you're wanting to find a space to develop?
Sure. I think it's different depending on what, one, where you've gone to university, if you've gone to university, two, who you know in the industry, and three, like how best placed are you to live and work somewhere like London. So I would say, sorry, I got an important work text that I need to answer, but give me 1 second. Until 7 until 8. Sorry.
No, you're right. We're
Cool.
watching a busy person out working. So,
Sorry. So
one
yeah, I think the complexity there is yeah, I think the complexity there is that I developed in Birmingham because I felt safe in Birmingham. I was also going through a mental health crisis, so I felt like my support network is in Birmingham. Birmingham gave me the space to develop for sure. There's a lot of appetite for the arts in Birmingham, rather there used to be, but Birmingham has changed because the council is broke and a lot of arts organisations are having their funding cut or completely taken away. But Birmingham was at that time a real good place for me to develop, a real great place for me to understand arts, how they should be completely accessible, understanding the human over the pretentiousness of art, which can be really present in London, more so than in Birmingham. It's such a working class city that it's really easy to kind of find your footing there. If you live in London or you have parents in London, develop in London, there's more opportunities, you'll rise quicker, you'll get paid more. If you have ties to a city, I always think that you should do your best to develop that city before you move to London. There's so much resources, so much stuff going on in London. It's really hard to make a mark in London. It's like ridiculously hard to make a mark in London. Make a mark in the city that you live in and then develop out of London for sure. I would also say that for me, I exist in this space of duality. I understand that I'm inherently selfish. I think everyone is, because we have to live as ourselves, right? So if you can't take care of yourself and your own needs, everything you do that's selfless is ultimately either selfish or performative. So for me, existing with that realization and that kind of revelation within myself, I always went wherever I felt like I'd be wanted or where I'd be valued. And that ultimately dictated my journey. There was no um yeah, there was no kind of if but maybe about it. I was either completely in it and my heart was in it, and then I took the opportunity, or I wasn't in it and I let the opportunity go. And that has kind of charted my course. I don't really have any kind of like quick methods or like tricks. I think ultimately, if your soul is in it, if you can put your heart into it, and it's something you truly believe in, then you'll always be successful. I think you'll always be successful. We don't live in a meritocracy. I will state that we don't live in a meritocracy, but your version of success is always your own happiness, right? So if you're happy with whatever you're going into, if you're happy with what the job you're going into, then the rest is just bullshit. Sorry. The rest is BS.
Yeah, you gotta say how it is sometimes. Yeah, that's perfect. And I think you've literally articulated exactly what I wanted to ask and what I wanted to get at in terms of, I think a lot of the times as Black people, as queer Black people, as people just already on the fringes and marginalized, but you want to start somewhere, you don't want to put yourself somewhere where you can't develop and grow because the environment you're in won't let you. because of
Listen.
racism and
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff. So I did want to, and it's amazing that you touched on that, because I did want to ask personally, where do you, if there are any specific kind of organizations or companies or people to look to get inspired by, where people, can actually grow and start their career from a place of development and like worth for themselves. If you just had any places off the top of your head or any people you think you're inspired by as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really inspired by organizations like Raise Collective that kind of, so that's RAZE Collective, and that's a London organization that kind of deals with queer arts and culture. But the way they do things is very DIY, which I love. But it's also kind of very human-centered and kind of care-centered. One thing I will say about like my journey, it's slightly relevant. My journey is that I wanted to be a writer. Like I love books, so I wanted to be a writer. And I am still a writer, but I'm not a writer professionally. And I wanted to work in production, obviously, at the very beginning. And I did fall in love with exhibition, absolutely. There's something magical about how a film connects to an audience. And I found that love. But ultimately, the reason I don't work in the industry in a creative space is because the industry doesn't deserve my creativity at the moment. There's so many barriers to existing in hostile spaces and in an industry post BLM, and understanding that an industry wants to cannibalize the creativity of Black and global majority peoples for the sake of their own kind of own presence or own kind of performative endeavors. I recognized I had to work in inclusion to try and change the industry before I was willing to put my creativity into the industry. And in a lot of ways, in this same role that I'm still doing that, inclusion is baked into the very foundation of the role that I do. And I work in the development of skills and training because I recognize it's a huge oversight of the industry, and the industry still doesn't deserve my creativity. So in terms of organizations that I feel you can grow in, you can really kind of understand yourself in a professional sense, but also understand yourself in a creative sense. I think the best thing you can do is build that yourself and be the leader of that. So if you are a creative, then I think existing as a person who creates their own art and then goes out to venues or festivals to perform that art, if you're an artist working on commission and then maybe taking freelance work on the side, if you are not like me and don't mind freelance work, I think being your own boss and getting to experience that, getting to experience the cultures that you want to embody will put you in a really good space when you move into a corporate space or a large organization, because you'll know your own worth. And if you don't do that, the first job that you have, if you have a terrible experience, it by human nature, we are habit forming. Um, and so for me, that habit was working a full-time job alongside running a festival. And now, whenever I try and work the amount I work, I burn out really quickly. But I feel guilty if I'm not doing a full-time job and a creative thing on the side because it feels unusual to me, it feels uncomfortable. And that's my habit forming, it's my toxic habit. And so to avoid having toxic habits, I think you need to work for yourself for a little bit, figure out what your kind of capacity is, what your limits are, and when it comes to work and your worth before you move into a space like this. But you can only do that in a city that's affordable. And it's really difficult to do under capitalism and under a cost of living crisis. So I acknowledge that too. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. Perfectly. So you then, does you kind of start out as, that something that kept your creativity going, and that was something, was it that there was already a queer community, a Black queer community there, or a QT BIPOC community in Birmingham that you were like, they're underrepresented, underserved, or did you have all these films first and then you were like, we need to share these, we need to show these? Kind of, what were you trying to serve first? How did you build CineQ really with your resources around you, and kind of what you want to build on for that?
So I think there's two answers to this. I think there's the answer I thought it was and the answer it was. the answer I thought it was I was led by the creativity. I was led by the fact that there were so many queer, trans, and intersex people of color who were creating great content and they weren't getting seen. Also, a lot of other queer people that were making great shorts that weren't being seen, great films that weren't being seen, and that was definitely part of it. The community was there, but I didn't see it. Um, and actually, my second answer, the honest answer, again, coming from a place of like, I'm inherently selfish, but try and do selfless acts, is that I was lonely and I didn't understand that there was a community in the city that I was in. And so I was trying to create a safe space for me and fill it with the things that I loved and open the doors so people with like that were like-minded would join my space. And I think I still do that to a certain degree. I think I have to do that to a certain degree. I think it's more present in London where it is really isolating to live in London. And so kind of providing a space for people that are like-minded to come into your space kind of creates your community. I was really thankful that CineQ allowed me to connect with so many incredible people, not just filmmakers, audience members, like creatives. And that really is why I've had the success I've had because of my network. It's not me, it's the people I surround myself with. Like, and they improve me. I hope I improve them. And they've been sustained friendships and kinships since then. But yeah, I would like to say it was all the creativity, and I think part of it was the films that drew me to it, the love of films. But I think if I just wanted to show films to friends, then I would have shown films to friends. I think I built a safe space because I wanted to exist in that safe space.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And I do think there's, it may seem selfish, but I think at the end of the day, people will be grateful that that community was created because there's somebody else who was probably thinking the way you were thinking, but maybe didn't have, Flat Pack and Amy Smart saying, you should go for that.
Yeah.
And, just being that like really encouraging voice. So I think it's amazing that you did create that space. And I think it's selfish, but it's also selfless. I think it's great that you opened your time and doors to do that. So um, I think that's CineQ's amazing for that. And there was another thing that you said previously at the start when you were talking about the beginning of your like creative industry or your creative career, sorry, and talking about piracy and accessibility and it's this huge thing that representation and accessibility just have to go hand in hand. You can have all of the films out there representing people of color, but if they can't pay to see them either on Netflix or Prime or in the cinema, then how are we actually going to see ourselves? So what was accessibility like at the forefront of your mind when you were also creating CineQ? Or like how do you, I guess in simplified terms, what are the most important things for you when it comes to accessibility and
Hmm.
presentation in film?
I respond to honesty. I respond to integrity. I think in terms of film, I there's a term called authentic authorship. Some people use positionality, and that is films and content that speak from a place that's represented behind the scenes. And so a lot of the content that I programmed was Black created if it was featured Black stories on screen. So for example, there's a film, I'm gonna shit talk a film now, but like it deserves it. So like there's a film called Femme that was released last year in December in the UK. And it's an incredible film, right? It is beautiful, it's unctuous, it's like it's visually appealing, the story is really enticing. But if you come from a black queer background, in this story, the black character is the only one that faces violence, both at the beginning, at the end of the film, and it's abhorrent violence. At the beginning of the film, it's a hate crime. At the end of the film, he's nearly killed. And despite the film centering around a black queer character, the main character, the character that is the most likable because you see the change, is the white character who committed both of these violent acts of violence, and there is no black queer representation behind the camera at all. And so, to the wider queer community, this film is incredible. And even I would watch it and say that was an incredible film, but it was racist as shit. Like, and so those are films that don't have representation behind it, like the representation they're trying to speak from on screen. Those are the films that I avoid like the plague. I want to tell authentic stories because I use film as a vehicle. I say I don't love film, I use film as a vehicle for change, and I love stories. So if a story is really interesting to me and the film brings it to life in a way that can change someone's mind, that's why I respond to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is, so incredible about talking. It's as much as we want to say it's, it's as much as about the film and the content, but that sort of representation, but that almost doesn't start unless you have representation and authentic representation behind the camera. And as you said, as you're working with CrewHQ, like all stuff below the line, if when you have a genuine kind of variety and diversity and multiple representations of people behind the cameras working in scripts, working and producing, then you can actually have accurate on-screen representation. And I guess you've just started at CrewHQ. You said it's something very fresh. Are you really bringing a lot of? Are you have you been able to kind of mold how this is working for skills and training? Like, what brought you to this job specifically?
So it was a strange one actually. It wasn't a typical decision, but it was the right decision. I think it was the right decision for me. I think it was the right decision for this place and this role. I think I have been able to mold it. But I guess my situation at the moment is building a baseline because it's brand new. All of the projects and programs that we're launching are brand new. And so having seen coming from an inclusion space, I've seen what happened previously to creative access where they were taken to court because they catered specifically for Black and global majority people and won that case because they had research to say that the industries that they were finding opportunities in were underserving Black and global majority people. And I've seen it on the other side in America because we are an American company. Warner Brothers Discovery is an American company, like American-led company, with Harvard, with Asian Americans saying that, yeah, giving affirmative action to students who had less impressive grades because of the underrepresentation in Harvard was taking opportunities from Asian Americans and also from white people and people that had legacy. So people that had alumni, a family that were alumni from those universities, from those colleges, and that was taken to court. And now affirmative action can't be a thing, and it's outlawed in America. So, and that's because there wasn't. I don't think their plight was backed by data. Our Equalities Act is really simple. It prevents discrimination. So we can't create a program that only a protected characteristic benefits from unless there's a proven disparity for that protected characteristic. So this year with CrewHQ, for me, it's about building a baseline. So in all the programs that we do, we collect data, and then at the end of the year, we review that data and say, these are how many people applied, these are how many people got through to interview, this is how many people got onto the program. If there's a severe drop in number, we know that we're the problem. We know that the ways that we assess those applications, the way that we give interviews is a problem. If not enough people are applying to the program in the first place, we know it's a problem with outreach. Or if all of the processes and the programs that we do there is a lack of representation, we can say we're not serving Black and global majority people, we're not serving disabled people, we're not serving like working class and low income people. So we can create a program specifically for those protected characteristics. Now, most people at that point would say, well, why are they separate? Why do they have to be separate? It should be ingrained in the things we do. And after a while, it can be. I think it has to be separate because when it's ingrained in it, it's not happening. So we need to create a separate program. But in 3 or 4 years' time, there's a case for it to join the program again, and then it's about money. So it's about saying we are underrepresenting Black and global majority people. So that means 30% of our spend every year has to be for Black and global majority people because we're underserving them. And so it doesn't matter if the program is unified, that means 30% of the people on that program will be Black and global majority because 30% of the spend has to be Black and global majority. So the Equalities Act is really beneficial because lawfully we have equality. We don't have equality socially. So there are ways in which you have to work to uphold equality and equity, and most of the world is still on a equality trip. I want to be on an equity so we can move to justice trip. And because equity isn't embedded in the Equality Act 2010, the way we do it is a little bit janky, but that's the kind of method and mode. So yes, I am thinking about inclusion and justice and equity in everything that I do and everything that we build. And I am advocating for it to be baked into a very foundation. But the way that you have to do that within a corporate space, but two, within the UK and the UK's law is a little bit weird. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's so interesting to just hear about, and it's been really interesting to hear about the policy and all that stuff that really goes into kind of making a equal access and making something that is based in equality. It's a word that now is thrown out there so much and we're hearing it all the time, but I don't think it is fully understood what that means for businesses who are trying to be equal. And so that's really interesting to actually like hear those statistics. Did your time as a race equality lead at BFI kind of influence you going into this job and being like, this is what I've seen back then, and this is what actually needed to change?
Yeah, I think yeah, very much so. I think when I was race equality lead, I was unable to action a lot of things that I wanted to action. And that's just because of the dynamic of inclusion. And what I learned is when you go into a role and you're specifically around inclusion, one, you will always be pushed towards inclusion. So if you decide after an inclusion role that you want to go on and be a talent exec, you will always be pushed towards inclusion. They'll be like, you're not a talent exec, you're inclusion. Two, if you sit in inclusion, you're always at the mercy of the larger organization. If I had a role and my role was inclusion and I was there to check over scripts and I was there to check over content, I was there to check over cuts of films to see if there's racism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, my recommendations wouldn't be mandated. I'd be like, oh, there's transphobia in this. And they'd be like, oh, that's a really interesting take. And they do whatever they want because inclusion exists often in industries in silos. And any inclusion practitioner will agree that the fight and the struggle to action things based on inclusive practice is really difficult. In the running of this job, I was up for two jobs. One of them was in inclusion, one of them was this job. And the decision that I made ultimately was because I recognize that in a director level role, I was able to impact things as part of the program and not separate from the program. Whereas in the other role, I would have been separate from the work. And it was a really great role. And I would have been personally really enriched because it involved reading scripts and watching content. And so I like creatively, I would have been really empowered by that. But would I have made a difference? I don't know. I didn't take the role, obviously, so I don't know what that role would have been like. But to me, in that situation, I chose a role that I thought I would have more power to make more impact. And especially because the project was brand new. And also because I knew that there was speaking to my two managers that I work for now, I knew that they had a passion for it. And I felt that passion when they interviewed me. I also felt like they really wanted me. So they knew what I was about. They knew that I speak like this. They knew that I'm really frank about the things that I've experienced and really frank about my experiences, and they still wanted me in that position. So for me, that means a lot. And that's often why I speak like this, why I'm so frank, why I'm so blatant about my experiences, why I feel no way about talking about my experiences at BFI or talking about my experiences at Shout Festival, because by being that way, I'm never masking who I am or how I feel. And then whoever wants me for me, less so for the person or the veneer that I am outside of that.
No, I think that's something that everyone needs to hear and should hear about fully going into a space as who you are, like, and not being afraid to be frank and be, to the point about what's going on, because I think those conversations need to be had. There's, a lot of the times we want to make people feel more comfortable, but at the expense of our own, our discomfort, which has been happening to just people of color and QT BIPOC people for time.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of time to give that up and actually speak the way you want to speak. And I think it's also inspiring that people want to look to spaces where they are welcomed and you see passionate other people to work with you. So I think that kind of ties back to one of the first things we said about going into spaces where you can develop and you are welcomed and you are safe.
Yeah.
I
My
think
only
that's really
addendum that sorry,
oh, you got-
my only addendum that I give to that is wait until your probation's over.
yeah, true, true. Give it that 3 months,
Yeah,
then
yeah,
join
yeah.
that's the take. That's the ultimate line of wisdom from this whole thing. Wait till the probation's done. Okay, that is amazing. We do have 10 minutes to just answer some questions. I think a couple questions have come through. So it'd be great just to spend some time going through that. So we have one here from Charlene Waterhouse saying Rico has had a wide experience in the arena before doing the Rome Festival. What was key factor in getting access? Was it knocking on enough doors and one will open? Depends on who you know. How easy was it to set up the festival? How did you get funding? What were the challenges? I think they're looking for just practical tips about how to set up a film festival.
So yeah, it depends on where you are. I think that for me, I was in Birmingham, so I don't know if the person that I'm speaking to knows this, but BFI have the central BFI in London, and then they have a hub in each region. So there's a film hub in Midlands, there's a film hub in North, there's a film hub in Southeast, there's a film hub in Northern Ireland, there's a film hub in Scotland, and they both do filmmaking. So they fund filmmakers and they also fund film exhibition activity. The Midlands hub is one of the kind of the best ones I've encountered, but I'm biased. And they fund new activity for exhibition, especially if you're serving a community that isn't currently served by exhibition. So whilst it wasn't easy to develop the festival to where it was, and it was really hard to bring in consistent audiences and to build that audience. And I wasn't paying myself to do that work, which is why I was working a full-time job alongside doing it. It doesn't pay, but it's worthwhile. And you get money for activity and you get a little bit of money for yourself within that. I started off as a community cinema, so I just ran every 2 months or month, like or 2 weeks at one point, showing queer film for free in a space that let me use it for free using their projector and their sound system. And I wasn't paying licenses for the short films because I was showing them and I wasn't charging for them. So most short film makers were like, we just want our films to be seen. If you're not charging, then we don't want a fee. As I started charging for them, then I would pay the short filmmakers a fee. So there was low cost to it at the very beginning. I was doing it with a lot of favors from people in Birmingham because I had those networks. But I didn't have those networks in the film industry. I was just going out and saying, oh, I really like that short film. Let me type in the director's name and then contact, and then go through 3 pages of Google to find their contact and then drop them an email and hope that they got back to me. Then after a while, like filmmakers were telling other filmmakers about us and what we were doing. So I'd have filmmakers come through and say, hey, I've made this film, it's QT BIPOC. Can you show it? And that made it easier. When I moved into kind of a feature space, I speak to distributors like Peccadillo Pictures, and they would be like, we've got these films that are being released in the next 3 months. We can give you this one before date. We can give you these after the date's been released. Or we've got these from last year. So those relationships kind of built themselves just from the work because the work was good. Building that into a festival, I showed the proof of building an audience to where it was, and then bid for a higher amount of money from the Film Hub Midlands, and they gave me like 7K to build a festival, which in the grand scheme of things, it was like a 5-day festival with like a speaker, like Campbell X came and he did like a filmmaker's brunch. It was incredible. Then we had screenings all weekend. We had 2 screenings on the evenings of Friday and Monday. And so the costs just went up and up and up. And we also paid for the hiring of those spaces because we were using cinemas. Because the difference is when we were doing shorts, we were doing them with a video file. When you're doing features, you often get them with a DCP, so you have to use a theatrical space, especially if you're getting films on release. So we would either partner with a place and then they would take a split at the box office, or we would pay to host that place. And we also tried to pay the places that we'd used previously when we didn't have funding, because now that we have funding, we thought it was equitable to pay them because they did us favors all that time. So like, yeah, get in touch with your local film hub, see what funding is available. Yeah, pull from your community. You might be sponsored by your local queer night or be able to do it at your local queer bar. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask for help. If your mission is good, then the people that think your mission is good will rally behind you.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think Johnny says that's very helpful. Thank you. We have another one from Kevin Scott, who's saying, hello, this is really insightful. I was wondering if Rico's company also offers help for those wishing to set up into marketing roles within the industry, as there seems to be so many barriers.
We don't. We only do below the line. So we do everything that's not in production. We do everything that's not writer, director, producer. So for CrewHQ, you could be you could be an editor, you could be post sound, you could be VFX, you could be production office, you could be accountants, you could be construction, you can be electrical. You can be any of those roles, but we don't help with we don't help with above the line, and we don't help with marketing or distribution. I where can I point you that does that? It's difficult. It's difficult. I think it's transferable, isn't it? So like you have to get a marketing role outside of the industry and parlay that into the industry. Um, yeah, I can't. I do my best, but I can't solve every problem. And
No.
there's still some inequities in the industry. And my interest is production and exhibition. So those are the things that I focus my energy on. But there should be initiatives for marketing or parlay marketing into the industry. And actually, our industry is really good at allowing people that have marketing experience outside the industry to parlay that into the industry because it's very transferable.
Yeah.
I hope that helped. Sorry, it wasn't as helpful as possible.
Um, I've got another one as well from Huda, who is saying, how do you take care of yourself in an industry that is systemically built against you, not just on a professional level, but also on a more personal level, as someone who does not have a familial presence?
That's a really good question. And for a while, I really didn't. Yeah, I think that's probably why I had my like mental health issues. Because even when I was kind of thinking about getting into industry and learning and that being the first time, I mean, I left my family home homeless, and then when I had student loan, it was the first time I'd had the amount of money I needed to be able to be stable. And so that's why I experienced my psychotic break at that point because my brain was finally like, oh, you can deal with this now, and then fell apart on me. And then putting my life back together. I'm surrounded by a really great chosen family in Birmingham, really great, sensitive people who are genuinely caring, and they are the reason I'm able to work as hard as I do in such a hostile space because I know I can always come out of that hostile space and exist in that space. That shifted slightly when I got here, when I got to London, because my network is significantly smaller, it's all work related, but my attitude changed. So now I don't give a fuck. Like if I'm in a hostile space, I will be hostile back and let them know that I'm being hostile back because they're making it hostile for me. And I think that I'm privileged to be able to do that because of my position, because of my career, and because of the integrity that I've built with the communities to be able to be in those situations and have that attitude. But I have that attitude because I know I won't survive otherwise. Like if I'm in a hostile space and I'm constantly swallowing that and constantly kind of just getting through and suppressing my own emotions for that, it leads to another psychotic break, and I'm not willing to exist like that. There is no reason. This is gonna sound like very dickheadish, but I have psychosis, right? So like I have a mental health condition that should prevent me from working. So at any time in my life, I could not work. I could go on ESA, I could go on benefits, and I'd be paid enough currently to be able to survive. I wouldn't thrive. I wouldn't be able to go out and do things, but I could survive. I would never take a job that or stay in a job that would do damage to my mental health because it's a difference of being able to work but dealing with psychotic symptoms or not being able to work at all for the rest of my life. And I would never risk my health for a position. And if I feel like I am and I'm in that position and I feel like the work is worthwhile, I will do everything I need to do to take care of myself over the kind of situation I'm in. Yeah. So basically, I'm an arsehole to situations that create an arsehole out of me. I'm always polite, I'm always nice, I'm never rude, but I don't take what I don't take.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. It's important to just be honest, I guess, with your emotions in that space, and not to always suppress them or try and, as you know, as you said earlier, make things uncomfortable for yourself for the comfort of other people. Even if some people don't feel like they have the backing, or I guess the representation to stand up, you can remove yourself from that space. Don't feel like you have to sit in a place of discomfort and a place of
Yeah,
distress.
for sure. I
Yeah,
think this. I think we often, especially as professionals, we get wrapped up in like professionalism, right? But it's a fallacy. Professionalism is treating people with respect and having people treat you with respect. Professionalism is being able to do your work. Professionalism is being able to succeed in your work because you're surrounded by people that want you to succeed for the benefit of that project, that organization, etc. Professionalism is not swallowing things that are toxic or swallowing things that are hostile in order to maintain a culture which is detrimentally affecting you. That isn't professionalism, and that is a fallacy, and it's a fallacy that is oppressive. It's oppressive, like disproportionately to Black and global majority people, to historically marginalized people more generally.
yeah, yeah. No, I think that is really important, and it's hopefully that was useful and important note to work on. And Huda at one point did say that's all we got, so I guess it was it was still a positive thing. But Kevin also said to your response to their question, thanks, it was definitely transferable. And they appreciate your stab at taking an answer, taking a stab at the answer. You did all good. And sometimes that's the best we can do. We can just do what we gotta do. So on that note, I think we've got only a couple minutes left, unfortunately, because this is an incredible hour talking with you. And just thank you so much for kind of sharing really vulnerable experiences that you've had in, you know, getting to where you are now, talking about your mental health. That is something that, you know, I think it's something we really appreciate, that people are out there genuinely saying these are struggles I've had and this is how I'm getting through it. And I think that's really inspiring for people to see that, you know, through either not having family support or going through something or being marginalized, you're in an incredible position. You do amazing work, and it's really inspiring to see, you know, you where you are. So it's all love. And on that note, I just want to thank, you know, everyone who has shared their questions and who is connected with us. You know, it's really important that we all kind of talk to each other and all share. So thank you so much for that. And again, thank you for Rico for rushing over here on a Tuesday evening straight after work to be with us. We are here, and it has been an incredible hour. So please do let us know where people can find you quickly, because we're already at 8, but you know, how people can get connected to you and, you know, where
Absolutely.
you are.
My Instagram is at Rico, Rico JS, so it stands for Johnson-Sinclair _ and then my Twitter is Rico RICO RRKLJ, and yeah, that's it. Just get into it. Or you can look me up on LinkedIn. It's Rico Johnson-Sinclair. Yeah, just type my name in any social media and I'll come up. It's a very unique name.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure people will be chasing you down to get all more wisdom from you. So thank you so much for joining. And again, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you BYP Network and the New Black Film Collective and our producer Sarah for just smashing it. So thank you so much for your help. Here is the QR code that you can scan if you wanted to sign up to Javelin just to get connected. And it also means you can register straight away for any future webinars and events that we've got coming up. So you don't want to miss more amazing talks like this. And also for what the New Black Film Collective have coming up, the next event we have is our TMB Expo, which the lovely Rico will be at in person. So you definitely don't want to miss it. It is a 4-day expo with a fantastic lineup of talks, screenings, pitching, networking, everything to give Black creatives, industry professionals a chance to exchange ideas, to, you know, fill the gaps in recruiting and develop a genuine filmmaking ecosystem. So yes, as I said before, Rico will be joining us, so do not miss a chance to come meet them in person. The event is absolutely free. And I believe Sarah will put the link to tickets in the group chat if people wanted to quickly snatch that up. So yeah, don't forget to follow the New Black Film Collective on Instagram, on X, and on Facebook at the New Black Film Collective, and BYP Network on IG at BYP Network, and Rico at their Instagram and LinkedIn and everywhere else you can find them as well. So yeah, huge thank you once again to Rico and to everyone for joining. And I hope everyone has had a great evening and learned so much the way I have, and hopefully see you all again soon. Thank you.